and friendship. And she's keen to continue to develop ways of working creatively with friends and family of those with ABI. And she's done some fantastic videos of patients, and the content is only available live to you guys. So a reminder that we are recording the session, and the presentation part will be available and the discussion part will be available afterwards on YouTube. So just a heads up that you are being recorded. But the good news is that if you have friends or family who couldn't make it, then it will be available to them. We will have the usual format. It'll be an hour long, so we'll be done by 8:30. The first half will be more of a presentation, and the second half will be discussion. If you can just make sure that the chat window is open, and to kick us off, if I can get you to type one word for how you are, for what's going on where you are right now, that would be great. And then I'll read them out. But you have to type in the chat window, people. So how are you doing? How are you feeling at the moment this evening? Good, tired, buzzy, exposed, tired, plate spinny, exhausted, chaotic, tired, great, anxious, calm, sort of, interested, exhausted, enjoying the warm evening. So lots of people feeling a bit tired, but hopefully this will reinvigorate you a little bit. Okay, on that note, it's my pleasure to hand over to Carol, who will kick us off.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Here we go. Hopefully sharing my screen and getting rid of that. And okay, hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yep.
So, okay, so we're talking about surfing the Coronacoaster tonight. And so the talk's been prepared by myself and Claire. I have to own up that I have no experience of working clinically at the moment, but we're really pleased that we're going to have some input, some lovely videos from Kathy, Joe and Alice, who'll be talking to us a bit later. So what we're going to cover is a bit about the communication challenges that we're all facing post and actually pre-COVID times. I'm going to talk briefly in this first bit about a framework for helping us think practically about how we can manage to implement communication access so that people with communication disabilities have equal access to our services. Then we're going to talk about, well, in fact, our other guests will be telling you a bit about the ups and downs of experiencing remote therapy. And then we have a lot of discussion. I know there's loads of experience in the room, so please do share your thoughts, questions via the chat space. And also at the end, we're going to share some useful resources, but I'm sure you guys will have some also that will be useful. So again, please do share those in the chat window. Okay, so what are some of the big issues we've been facing currently? There has been a lot of mask debating going on. There's a K in that, by the way. So I don't know about you guys, but when I go out with my face covering on, somehow I can't see or hear as well as I can without my face mask on. So, I mean, that's me. Don't currently have a communication disability. Well, that's debatable. But, you know, so what's it like for people who are in a starting position of living with anxiety or, you know, have any kind of communication cognitive disability? So big challenges then. Actually, frankly, I do not know how you guys manage in hospital and institutional settings where you're having to do all your work wearing masks. In webinar, I think it was webinar 7, Debbie Harding and Arnie Prentice gave us some nice sort of introduction around what are some of the issues for practitioners and for client work in the context of these remote interactions. And of course, there's all the kind of clunkiness with the technology that they talked about, and also that kind of how you do that initial relationship building, how you manage to, you know, they gave some really good tips on how to perhaps be more explicit in expecting gaps and pauses and silences, and being really upfront with what you're going to be covering in the session. So there's issues around how we manage those, but of course working with people with communication disability, and I should say that tonight we're referring particularly to people with cognitive and communication disability in a sort of neuro disability context, but hopefully a lot of this stuff will be relevant for those of you working in other settings. But if I was having a conversation with a person with marked aphasia, for example, we'd be sitting next to each other. We'd probably have a lot of stuff on the table. There'd be kind of photos. People might be sharing stuff that's on their phones. I'd be writing, they might be writing. So, you know, how do you manage that supported conversation and managing all those physical props for conversation when you're socially distant, either because you're doing it remotely or because you're 2 meters apart? So real challenges there. And then the kind of third big issue that hopefully some of you will be interested in engaging in discussion on tonight is the challenges in the ways we meet as human beings in these COVID times. I'm particularly heartbroken, really, when I hear the stories of disconnection and really dehumanizing disconnection in some social care settings where people with dementia, for example, are deprived of touch, conversation, meeting up with people that they know, managing to live through that emotionality, which helps conversations with people with dementia, and the kind of staggeringly awful impact that has on their ability to function. And we've had a lot of stories of people kind of losing function in relation to communication, cognition, and physical well-being. The other thing to just think about, this is really pre-COVID. So in days of yore, when we used to meet up and have face-to-face workshops, these are now online, by the way. If you're interested, do sign up via the Bridges website. But when we used to have face-to-face workshops, and we'd always start with saying, well, what are some of the big issues for you guys working in practice? And inevitably, people would say, it's really hard doing self-management, having those self-management-y conversations when people have cognitive and communication difficulties. So, you know, that having conversations with people, doing assessments with people, running therapy sessions with people, running groups with people, it's always more difficult when there's cognition and communication challenges in the pot. So what I want to talk about in the next few slides is thinking about communication access, and how, if we maybe get our heads around ourselves facilitating good communication access, how we can be more inclusive and manage to include people with cognitive and communication difficulties in our sessions. So we all kind of understand physical access. So if you're a wheelchair user and you come up against an environment that's got steps, you know, the way in is going to be hopefully by having a ramp put in, or using a walking stick or mobility aids that's going to help you get around those physical barriers. But actually it's a bit more difficult getting your head around how do you get into a communication environment so that you can participate in that environment on equal terms. So, you know, what's the step-free route? What are the communication props and ramps that are going to help you get into a conversation? When I worked at Connect a while back, we did a project with the King's Fund, which was looking at communication access. So we worked with people with aphasia to come up with how can we have more equal access? How can we reach and include people with aphasia more equally in all of the healthcare interactions we have? And we came up with this sort of quite simple little Toblerone of communication access, which has 3 points, which I'm going to talk through in a minute. And what do we need to do in relation to these interacting 3 points before you meet up with someone, while you're having your intervention or interaction with them, and after you've been in a session with them? So you're thinking about before, during and after, and we're thinking about these different corners of the Toblerone. So first up, documents, and by documents, I'm not just meaning, documents could be any artifacts, any written or visual kind of backup. So that might be, what do you have to do ahead of time? Think about the letters that you're sending out. How do you really clearly and accessibly let people know what to expect? Be very clear about what dates and the timings in an accessible format so that there's no kind of anxiety around that. In terms of preparation, what do you need to think about? But actually, what can you send the client in terms of what can you think about before I arrive for the session? What are the things that are most important to you? How do you really want to use this time that we're going to have together? So get them to think about what they can bring with them, which might include things like photos or pictures or artifacts, letters that they have in their possession. Stuff like that. So all of these I'd refer to as communication props or ramps that can help. There's sort of written documents or written stuff that can help people get into the conversation. During the conversation, you can't predict everything that's going to come up. So you've got to be a bit ready to do stuff on the hoof. So having just a clipboard with a nice big marker pen, because you're not going to be able to share it in person with them. You're going to have to hold it up to your camera. So you might be writing down keywords or diagrams. I'll give you some examples in a moment. Calendars and timetables can be really useful to share. Different web and written information can be helpful. You might want to bring along or send along ahead exercise sheets. After you've done your what's really important to you and done a bit of goal setting, you might want to follow up with the record of small steps like there are in the Bridges handbooks, or you might just want to do summaries and notes from the session. I know Claire gets, in her group sessions, gets a member of the group to write up summaries from the session. Obviously there's reports, and also video recordings are a kind of great way of having a visual backup that isn't just said and kind of gone in the air. So that's the first corner of the triangle, and here's some that some marvellous people have prepared earlier. So there's all sorts of aphasia-friendly kind of pictograms that you might want to use if you're having conversations about COVID. I really like this. The Aphasia Institute, people will probably know, does great resources and pictograms. Here's a nice consent form. And these are just some examples of stuff you might do in the during of the session. What's really, walking the dog is really important to you. So what are some of the things that might make that easier, or things that might make it more difficult? And you see, you don't have to be a marvelous drawer, even though you can tell that I am a Picasso in the making. Okay, then the second corner of the Toblerone, we're thinking about environment. So particularly in this kind of virtual environment, you want to, these remote interactions, you want to be really clear for yourself and for your clients, where is the session going to take place? How do you make sure that noise and distractions, dogs, telephones, televisions, children are kind of kept to a minimum? Setting up the camera, be really careful and have a nice practice about how you do that, so that people think about what you need to see. You will need to see face and arms often, and you might need to see things that people are holding up. Think about and ask your clients to think about what makes what sort of enhances the listening environment for them and for you, and what kind of helps keep it relaxed. And I know there's people I know with aphasia, for example, one of the things that helps them feel safe and comfortable in a remote interaction is having a friend or a partner with them. Other people, what makes them feel safe is having that partner right out of the room and upstairs or out the door. So think about what works for different people. And then the other thing that is a huge barrier for people with any degree of communication disability is often time and time barriers. So think about the temporal environment. How do you ensure that there's no rushing? What are the additional concentration demands of, for example, a Zoom consultation? So what's the appropriate length of time for your session? And then lastly, thinking about the interactions and how you're sort of balancing the props that you've got, your environment, and your online conversation session with the person. So what is it that's going to help? You know, how do you spend a bit of extra time at the beginning establishing that relationship and rapport building? And Arnie and Debbie talked a lot about how, you know, if you're usually doing a community visit, you'd be picking up all your socio-cultural clues as you're walking down the road, walking in the front door of the client you're going to see. You don't have that. So maybe you want to share a bit more about yourself at the beginning, just spend a bit more time establishing that rapport. If you're working with someone who's got comprehension difficulties, what is going to help them really get the message in so that they fully understand what you're saying? So for some people that might be repeating stuff, for some people it might be going slower. Some people I know like to have a card that says stop or shut that flip up. If someone's going too fast, slow down. So things like that might help with getting the message in. Then your props, your communication props and ramps and stuff that you've thought about and they've thought about ahead of time might help get the message out. Big thing with people who struggle with communication might be feelings of incompetence, feeling stupid. And so it's our job to bring stuff, prepare stuff ahead of time so that we help reveal the person's competence and we acknowledge them as competent people. And I know one of the issues with remote conversations has been that people can almost feel doubly stupid for not getting the words out, but stupid for the technology blips also. Okay, and then it's just physically how you manage all of the camera stuff and all of that. Then very lastly, so that communication access stuff, good for thinking about the practicalities of managing that, those remote conversations by thinking about the environment, the stuff you've got to visually back it up, your interactions. But I think some of the other work I've been doing is looking at what humanizes and dehumanizes healthcare interactions. And I think there's a big danger at the moment that with blanket protocols applied across everyone, there's a risk of forgetting some of the uniqueness that humanizes interactions. And again, some of the other conversations in previous webinars have kind of hinted at almost a danger of losing some of the person-centeredness we've been doing because these big new protocols and fear and let's do everything remotely has sort of suddenly kind of taken away from some of the uniqueness. Another humanizing dimension would be thinking about the insiderness. And if we think about words like isolation and social distancing, for some people living with communication disability, that's like just part of their everyday reality. So again, they've potentially got the double whammy of the loneliness of disconnection, as well as the loneliness that comes from communication, living with communication disability. So even more important to explore and support people to find opportunities for connecting with peers and friends and family. And I know there's some people, there's some great peer support groups like Discover and various sort of local groups. So really got to push some of those. And then another one of the humanizing dimensions is thinking about the personal journey. We all, with any illness, kind of, we kind of work at trying to make sense of that illness and how we connect our past with our present to the future. And in these COVID times, we've all got an even more uncertain future. So it's just another kind of interesting take on a different dimension of what makes interactions more or less humanizing. Okay, and there's more references there. We can talk more about that if people are interested. So now I'm going to hand over to the lovely Claire, who's going to introduce our other speakers.
So rather than hearing my thoughts and reflections on remote therapy, I interviewed 3 of my clients that I'm working with at the moment with acquired brain injury. So Kathy, Alice and Joe are people who have experienced remote therapy as a result of the pandemic. And I just asked them 3 questions. I asked them to tell me a bit about their experience with remote therapy, to talk a bit about the challenges, and then to highlight any benefits. And I thought the best way of really capturing what they came up with was just to show you those videos. So we're just going to show all 3 videos, they're just a few minutes each, and then we'll come back at the end. So there were loads of themes that came out through those videos. And so we had the fact that the preconceptions of what remote therapy might be like, some issues about access to therapy, the technical issues came up, and the fact that we all need fibre optic broadband. But also the kind of access to family and friends. Some of that, I think in some cases we were able to work with family and friends a little bit more over the recent period, because family and friends have been at home and have been around and have been able to join some of the interventions. There was themes around building relationships and how you can build those relationships online, but those more bonding friendships, I think there's still the importance of that face-to-face interaction. People talked a bit about their confidence around meeting remotely versus face-to-face. So I know Alice is feeling quite nervous about that face-to-face meetup. And I thought there's quite a few other barriers to therapy that came through. So fatigue, travel. Some other clients that I worked with said that actually the cost of traveling to sessions was a barrier for them. So being able to do it online meant that they could access therapy. And what's been interesting with some of my group work and communication partner therapy that I've been doing, both NHS and privately, is that the DNA rate has been so low. And usually there'll be all sorts of reasons why people can't make a session, but I think when it's online, actually people can access things a bit more easily. And there have been some new opportunities arisen for group therapy and peer support. And these are some of the things that we thought you might like to ask us a bit more about and get some of the discussion going.
Is that the right point to open up the discussion? Yeah, okay.
Can I just start, Katie? I just wanted to ask Claire, because Claire, obviously it's sort of a bit easier to get videos of people who have a bit more language and, you know, more able to talk to camera. So what experiences do you have of working with remotely with people with more severe aphasia or more severe communication difficulty?
Well, that's a really good question. I actually, my preconception was that it would be very difficult to provide therapy remotely for people with moderate to severe aphasia. And actually my experience so far is that it really can work, and you can support people remotely. You have to be creative using some of the things that you talked about earlier, Carol. So pictorial resources sent in advance, sharing the screen, using paper and pen like we would normally, and just showing it up at the screen. All of those strategies can be adapted for remote therapy. For some clients, it can be helpful having a family member or a support worker working with them to support them, but quite a lot of people don't need it. They need a bit of help setting up, and then they can actually get involved in group or one-to-one therapy remotely, and that's okay. In some ways, I've actually found clients like Alice, who was very open about it in her video. She's found logging into Zoom really tricky, and it's been hard for her to learn it. So she's needed exactly the same prompting every time to be able to remember that it's Zoom, and remember that she's going to be emailed the link, and sort through her emails, because since I sent it, there have been lots of spam in her email box. So actually, almost people with the more complex cognitive difficulties, I'm finding are having more difficulty.
Yeah.
There was a question from Sue, who said that Jay was highlighting the importance of group dynamics, and she wonders if there's any tips or criteria for participants within a group, and how you decide whether the group's working. I suppose also because you're not there, so can you pick up on those dynamics that you'd otherwise get in face-to-face?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I find I'm loving the group work, but it's exhausting, because you're actually observing all of those screens at the same time. So it's after a couple of hours of group work, I'm really, really tired. So I think you definitely can support rapport building remotely, just like a face-to-face group. some groups work and some groups don't, and I think some of the criteria around that are, do they have something in common? And for some people, having their brain injury in common is enough, but for lots of people, actually they want something else in common, some other topics or interests or stage of life or family, some themes that are in common. So actually I recently ran a group for clients with aphasia, and that gelling didn't quite work. And I think partly that was because we struggled to find things that they had in common. Some of the strategies I've used to support rapport building is people bringing objects to the session, because obviously they're at home, so they can bring things from their environment to share, so photos or piece of art or books, anything they'd like to share. We did a session where people brought their favourite piece of music to share. So there's lots of things you can do to still try and get people to be getting to know each other a little bit more. And I also make sure at the start of every session we spend quite a bit of time checking in, just talking about the week. Because actually when you arrive in a group face to face, there's always 5-10 minutes where you might be making a coffee, where you might be just taking your coat off, and you'll be having that bit of natural chat. So just trying to create that at the start of each session has worked quite well, actually. Yeah, so they're the sort of things that I might try.
Scott, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, so I was just interested how you decide who is appropriate for virtual therapy and who those people are that you just have to go and see in person. And these are some of the things that we touched on in previous webinars, but just from more of a communication point of view.
Yeah, so I'm sure other people here will have other experience. Actually, I think that at the moment, in my independent work, I'm trying to do as much remotely as possible, just to reduce kind of travel and need to wear PPE. But where there are clients where it really doesn't work, then we need to be offering face-to-face. I don't think you can tell until you've had a go, actually, who's going to be appropriate. So in my experience, on paper, I might have thought someone wouldn't manage and they actually do, and vice versa as well. So I sort of think it's, in an ideal world, you can meet them face-to-face first and then explore it with them and maybe try it out to see if they can access the therapy. And I suppose if you felt that actually they weren't able to access the therapy that you'd normally offer, that's then when I would try and offer face-to-face. I don't know if other people in the audience have got other experience.
Yeah, what does everyone else find? And anyone else willing to share their experience of who kind of is or isn't appropriate for remote therapy?
While you're looking, Katie, I know some of my kind of friends I've talked to, that the issue about who has, a lot of people now do have support with the tech in terms of family members or friends. It's a great way that friends can kind of get involved. But if people really have trouble with the technology, it's almost like the severity of the technology issues is worse than the severity of the language and communication issues. So, if I was working clinically, I think those are the people I'd really prioritise, where for having tried your best or sent your best rehab assistant out to do the advanced work or whatever, but if those people are really struggling to get online or live alone and need support to get online, those are the people I tend to sort of prioritise. And I think it's looking at both it's not just the communication severity, it's the tech severity.
Yeah, absolutely right.
There was another question about with the group work, whether they then carry on their own, potentially. Have you found that there's desire to then carry on the group on their own?
Yeah, it's really nice. So I've only started the groups fairly recently. So my very first group that I started actually are just about to start meeting independently of me. There's a real kind of self-management side to the group therapy. And that's really nice. So they'll meet with the purpose of social friendship, probably just supporting each other with everyday things, maybe just for half an hour a week. And I'm going to suggest they start off at the same time that the group has been running, so they've got it as a bit of a routine. Obviously in the future they may choose different times, but they initiated that themselves. They initiated a WhatsApp group that I'm not on, that's just them, and then they've talked about wanting to keep the group going, and they don't need to have me for that, but I will be a bit of a support and facilitator, just to ensure they can have some success with it. That's really positive. I don't think all the groups will do that, but this group have chosen that.
Jen, can you tell us about your practice to get on Zoom group? That sounds really fun.
Can you hear? So one of our physio technicians runs just a informal group for our patients that want to utilize the Zoom groups that we're running. Just a session for practicing to get on Zoom, and that is the object of that class, so to speak. Just so that people know that they're not alone in having the technology problems. Because I think a lot of the time people feel I'm going to be holding everyone up at the beginning of the class, and I'm going to be the only one that's having problems. And we're just really trying to impress on people that it's been a journey for ourselves learning how to use this technology, and they are most definitely not alone in having struggles. And so sometimes just offering that opportunity to kind of meet other people that are feeling anxious about it, and then it just makes them hopefully feel a bit more confident when they come to actually log on to the class that needs to start on time, and it comes to that basically.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jen. There was another question about the groups and whether it's best to have people of a similar level or mixed groups. What do you guys think about that?
I suppose I'm sort of veering towards people being a bit of a similar level, because they're working on similar goals, they can give each other support and feedback, but I don't think that's a hard and fast rule at all, and lots of my face-to-face groups over the years have been much more of a mix. But interestingly, with the online groups, they probably work better when they are a bit more matched. Actually, I don't know if that's just my more recent experience.
That seemed to be what Joe was getting across as well, didn't it? That the other guys were at a similar level in their recovery and rehab and stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely with that. So the other client was lower level, and actually it was then a bit more difficult for the 3 higher level clients to perhaps get what they need from the group, because no one was finding the group that easy. So it's kind of
Emma's just given a really nice example actually of starting as a bigger group but then going into smaller breakout rooms.
Yeah, that's a lovely idea. Yeah,
I think I think there's no one size fits all.
No, I agree.
And I personally, I think, well, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to mix people because you might only have a limited number of people who are available on that day at that time. But I'd be inclined to try things out, have a go, and sometimes you'd be surprised that people with different severities of communication disability kind of manage really well together because they communicate in different ways.
Yeah, and so they can have quite a nice support role as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're all each other's communication partner. So I think there's no clear rule on it, and just being quite open and trying things out. And I love Emma's idea though of starting off with a larger group and then splitting it.
And you were talking, Claire, weren't you, about sort of, I see there's a question about peer support, and could groups be a peer-led thing? I mean, I certainly know of some groups that are peer-led, but you were talking also of maybe starting to co-facilitate a group with someone.
Yeah, I think that would be quite exciting. So actually someone potentially like Joe, who you saw in the video, I've not mentioned this to him yet, but I wondered if in the future he may like to do that, and I think we could create some nice opportunities for other people to be running the groups. One of the key themes that comes through the groups is how having feedback and kind of almost learning about brain injury or learning about adjustment is easier from your peers than from a speech therapist. And so obviously I'm there in the group, but actually most of their learning is from each other. So I think it's developing that idea further. I really like that.
So Rosemary's having a bit of a rubbish time with her internet, and I really liked actually where Joe called everyone out and said, you know, you've got to invest in good broadband. That's what you're going to provide longer term. But yeah, so she said it's really worth investing the time in real-time tech support and skill building, and they've got parallel WhatsApp groups as a bit of a safety net for people.
Yeah.
If they struggle. Is Fiona still here? Fiona had a question.
Yep, I actually had a tech problem as well midway through. But I was just, it's a slightly different question, but I just struck me that some of the skills that you're expecting people to be able to cope with. I mean, somebody like yourself, Claire and Carol, and some senior people, you might have seamlessly embraced this way of working, but I'm just thinking about new staff, more junior staff, and whether you've had experience of, or how you do your supervision, you know, when you're actually trying to induct people into this way of working. Because I mean, I think all of us probably agree that this is a way of working where there's parts of it we don't want to lose, so it become part of the sort of skill set of therapy, I guess. But it was just a question to you, Claire, about junior staff, or if anybody else has had experience of supervising staff as students on placement.
So I've actually recently shared some students on placement who were absolutely amazing. So they were way better at the tech than me, and they really embraced the clinical work. I think they needed a little bit more support around kind of rapport building with the clients. I think that was, it made me realise, gosh, it's hard. It's actually hard work. Just suddenly there's your client online and you've just got to get on with it. So I think what might be nice if I have students again is actually videoing some of the work I'm doing and letting them see that and pick up on some of the different ways of supporting rapport building, and then maybe having a bit of a go before they go in and see a client, and ideally seeing some clients face to face as well if possible. So it's a strange world for them, because some of them will have their whole adult placement all remotely.
I suppose that's one of the benefits, though. You can record your sessions, and so they can record their sessions and look back, and that will really help with reflection.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things we haven't really talked about, is how much easier recording therapy and sessions is at the moment. So the recording function on Zoom is amazing, and it's very straightforward, and then you can just share the screen and watch things back. So actually, in terms of your supervision with your students, it's going to be almost a bit easier to share those videos and to look at things together.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to share my screen again and hand back over to Carol.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So just to kind of summarise some of the points from today, just remember those principles of communication access, which, as someone in the chat room said, is about better communication for all. It's relevant across the board. Really think about preparation. Really be mindful of what humanises and dehumanises interactions and contacts. And I think it's really hard to know what to do about this, but one of the things is just to be really aware. Thinking of the last webinar on race and racial discrimination issues, if you see something happening which is dehumanizing, call it out, and then, you know, in a nice, kind way, work together, think about how you can, as a team, as a group of stakeholders, address it. And be creative about how you are modelling better communication and advocating for sort of better human connection. Okay, and next slide, please, Katie. This is just, I'm sure people here will have ideas and on references and resources, but that top one is really brilliant. There's a whole spreadsheet of stuff that will support you to do telepractice, running Zoom groups for people with aphasia, e-learning modules for supported conversation, how to support people in COVID times with their mental health and well-being. So there's loads of stuff. All of the stuff is on that kind of top one. And the other ones I might just single out. There's some really nice accessible written pictorial stuff on how to make video calls. There's some lovely stuff from the Centre for Person-Centred Care, AUT, in New Zealand. So I know there's some New Zealand folk, get in there. And yeah, there's some good tweeters who share a lot of good stuff. So I've just put some of the tweeters there. You probably know other ones. I'm hopeless on Twittering. And just the last slide, Katie, back to the masturbating. And here's just some nice tips on, nice user-friendly tips. These are from UCL on thinking about how you communicate while wearing a face covering. And that's all.
Thank you guys so much. That was really, really brilliant. We've got, well, we've not got any time left. We've got 30 seconds. If I can just ask you to put, again, one word in the chat window for how you're feeling now. And whilst you're doing that, I'll tell you about the next webinars. We've got 2 topics coming up. We've not firmed up exactly which one, but we're dropping down to doing them monthly. So the middle of October will be the next one. We've got a part 2 on race and health inequalities, which will be a discussion, panel discussion. So no presentations, just quite free-flowing discussion with the fantastic speakers that we had last time. So Geeta, Mish, Kweku and Shah. The other thing that we'd like to do is one on having those difficult conversations, because we know that when people are having healthcare interactions, if it's something that a healthcare professional feels uncomfortable about, they'll quite often cut that down. And it's something that all of us have discussed and felt is quite important to think about. So again, we'll have a few guest speakers, hopefully. If there's anything else, any other bees in your bonnets, then do get in touch, any other challenges. And once again, please help us out by filling out that survey. That would be really helpful to make sure that any future content for webinars, podcasts and training is on point and relevant and useful for you. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. And thank you to Carol and Claire. You've been brilliant.
Bye, thank you.